If you have ever been the family disappointment while your sibling got treated like royalty, then you already know how this story begins. My name is Mariana Torres, and for most of my 20s, I was the daughter people explained away. My older sister Camila was the one my parents displayed. She had the degrees, the polished title, the expensive engagement ring, the kind of life my mother narrated to strangers like it was a family achievement. Camila was a senior operations executive at a biotech company in Houston, earning more money than my parents had ever made in a year. She was engaged to Andrew Whitmore, whose family owned a string of private medical centers across Texas. They lived in a glass-walled, high-rise condo my mother showed off in pictures like she personally owned it. I lived in a small apartment in East Austin, with thrifted furniture, one decent frying pan, and a car so unimpressive my sister once called it a cry for help on wheels. When I left college after 2 years, my parents settled on a version of the story that made them most comfortable. I could not handle the pressure. I lacked discipline. I had potential, but no follow-through. They repeated it enough times that eventually it became family fact. The truth was different. They just never cared enough to ask. At every holiday dinner, the hierarchy was obvious. Camila talked about product rollouts, leadership retreats, and industry recognition. Andrew talked about foundations, donors, and the kind of people his family vacationed with. If I mentioned work, my mother's smile would tighten, and she would redirect the room in under a minute. "That's nice, sweetheart. Camila, tell them about your award." There was always an award, always a framed plaque, always some polished proof that she was the daughter worth presenting. Then the wedding planning began. It was 18 months of obsession. Historic venue, imported flowers, designer gown, guest list curated like a boardroom seating chart. Andrew's family was covering more than half, and my parents took on debt to close the gap because, as my mother said with shining eyes, Camila deserves one perfect day. At first, I was supposed to be a bridesmaid. Then I was moved out of the wedding party because Camila decided her bridal photos needed a more cohesive professional image. 3 weeks before the wedding, I got the text. I was at my kitchen table, laptop open, reviewing quarterly numbers, when my phone lit up. "Mariana, we need to talk about the wedding. Andrew's parents are very conscious of appearances, and they've been asking questions about the family. I think it may be better if you don't come. You'd be uncomfortable anyway. These really aren't your people. Hope you understand." I read it 3 times. Then I replied with one word. Understood. She called immediately. "Mariana, please don't be dramatic." "I'm not. You asked me not to come. I'm not coming." "It's more complicated than that." "No," I said. "It's actually very simple." She exhaled like I was the difficult one. Then she started listing names and titles. Andrew's father knew donors. His cousin was in state politics. His mother sat on museum boards. They had expectations, standards, concerns about presentation. Finally, she said it plainly. "You work in customer service. You live in a tiny apartment. Can you at least understand why this might be awkward?" I looked around my apartment while she talked. My little kitchen, my cheap shelves, the lamp I had assembled myself, the life she thought was embarrassing. "Crystal clear," I said. "Enjoy your wedding." Then I hung up. After a minute, I opened my calendar and pulled up an event I had planned to skip for her wedding, the Texas Innovation and Enterprise Awards. Same night, same time, and suddenly I was free. What my family never knew was this. I had not dropped out because I was failing. I left because I had built something that was already working. Back in my sophomore year, I kept noticing the same thing. Small business owners were drowning. Spas, dental offices, independent retailers, service companies, they all needed decent customer management software, but the good systems were priced for corporations, not normal people trying to keep payroll covered. So I started building one. I taught myself to code after class, spent nights and weekends creating a cloud-based CRM designed for small businesses that needed clean tools without enterprise bloat. I priced it low enough to be practical and structured it so owners could actually use it without hiring consultants. I called it Threadline. By the time I left school, I already had paying clients and enough early traction to know the window was real. My parents thought I had thrown away my future. In reality, I had signed my first serious contracts and was working more hours than I ever had in college. The next 4 years moved fast, then faster. 50 clients became hundreds, hundreds became thousands. We built a real team, hired experienced operators, added product support, expanded nationally. By the beginning of the year, Threadline was generating over $20 million annually, employing 24 people, and had just closed a funding round that valued the company at $87 million. I was 26, and I never told my family. Part of it was privacy, part of it was caution, but the deepest part was simpler and sadder than that. I wanted to know whether they could love me before the success was visible. Whether I had any worth to them without a title they could brag about. Camila's text answered that question more clearly than anything else ever had. So, on the night of her wedding, while she walked into a ballroom in Dallas trying to impress a family obsessed with polish, I walked into a ballroom in Austin wearing a midnight blue gown and heels expensive enough to make my old self laugh. My friend Daniel came with me. He was a founder I had met 2 years earlier and one of the few people who knew the whole family situation. As we stepped into the hotel, he looked at me once and said, "Whatever happens tonight, remember this was always yours." The room was packed with investors, founders, journalists, state officials, and every version of power Texas likes to dress in formal wear. The under 30 category was announced near the end. 5th place, 4th, 3rd, 2nd. Then the governor returned to the stage. "Our final honoree," she said, "has built a company serving thousands of small businesses across the country, created high-paying jobs in Texas, and transformed access to tools once reserved for major enterprises." Screens lit up with our logo, product screenshots, growth charts, client testimonials. She left college to pursue her vision, taught herself the skills she needed, and built an $87 million company before the age of 27. Please welcome Mariana Torres, founder and CEO of Threadline. For one suspended second, the room went perfectly still. Then it erupted. I stood. Daniel squeezed my hand. I walked to the stage with cameras flashing so brightly they almost erased the room. The governor handed me a glass trophy, heavy and cool in my hand, and smiled for the photographers. Then she asked what had driven me to build the company. I took the microphone and looked out at a room full of people who had decided I mattered before knowing where I came from. "I built Threadline because small business owners were being ignored," I said. "They needed tools that could genuinely help them compete, but the market only catered to the biggest players. I wanted to change that." She nodded. "And you left college to do it?" "I did. That could not have been easy." "It wasn't," I said. "My family thought I was making the worst decision of my life." A small ripple moved through the crowd. I smiled. Turns out I was building the best one. The room laughed, then applauded. Afterward, the photos went everywhere. Industry accounts, business press, major founders, state political pages. By the time the reception started, I was being stopped every few minutes for congratulations, interview requests, and introductions. My phone was vibrating in my clutch the entire time. I ignored it until later. When I finally checked, there were over 100 messages. Old classmates, investors, journalists, people I had not heard from in years. And then, my family. "My mother, people are showing me photos of you with the governor. Is this real? Please call me." My father. "We need to discuss what we're seeing online." Camila. "My wedding guests are all looking at your feature. You did this on purpose." I put the phone away and went back to my evening. For the first time in my life, I did not feel small in the presence of other people's approval. The fallout started immediately. The business exposure was incredible. Traffic spiked, demo requests flooded in, press inquiries stacked up. We had to hire outside PR support within days. But the family fallout was even faster. 2 days after the wedding, Camila called. I declined it. She texted instead. "Andrew's parents saw everything. They're asking why you weren't there. This is making us look terrible." I stared at the message, then replied, "You uninvited me because you said I would embarrass you. What exactly is there left to fix?" She sent back, "I didn't know." And that was the problem. She never asked. My mother called an hour later. I answered, mostly because I wanted to hear how she would frame it. "Why didn't you tell us?" she demanded, voice already strained with hurt she had not earned. "You never asked what I actually did. You said customer service." "I do serve customers," I said. "I just happen to own the company." Silence. Then the familiar defensiveness. They had been worried. I had dropped out. I had looked like I was struggling. I had never explained. I kept my voice calm. I should not have to provide a presentation to deserve basic respect from my own family. She tried to smooth it over, said the Whitmores wanted to meet me now, said they were impressed, said there might be opportunities. I cut her off. They want to meet me because I'm useful now. That is not the same thing as valuing me. That conversation ended badly. The next week, Andrew called on behalf of his mother, asking whether I might be interested in lunch, maybe a discussion about charitable partnerships and technology initiatives. It was such a clean, polished version of opportunism that I almost admired it. "No," I said, "I don't build relationships with people who only noticed me once Forbes did." Then I hung up. Camila sent me message after that. Apologies, excuses, panic about her in-laws, panic about appearances, panic about what she had lost. I read enough to know the center of her distress was still herself. Then my mother showed up at my apartment. She stood in the middle of my living room, looking around like she had entered a life she could not reconcile with the daughter she thought she knew. The furniture was simple. The space was small. But it was clean, warm, and mine. Finally, she asked, "Why didn't you tell us?" And I told her the truth. Because I needed to know if you loved me without the success. That landed harder than anything else I had said. She apologized, really apologized, though too late to make the past disappear. She admitted they had treated Camila like a success story and me like a cautionary tale. She admitted they had not looked closely because they assumed they already understood me. I told her I needed time, space, boundaries, not one emotional afternoon and then a full family reset. She cried a little, I did not. Over the next few months, the company kept growing. We closed another major round, expanded operations, and signed partnerships that would have seemed impossible 2 years earlier. I bought a house in Austin. Nothing gaudy, just quiet, beautiful, and fully paid for. My father called after seeing the photo online. This time, when we met, he was different, less polished, less certain. He looked at me over a paper coffee cup and said, "I failed you." I let him say the rest. He admitted he had projected his own worldview onto me, that because my path did not resemble his, he had mistaken it for recklessness, that he judged before asking, that he praised my sister for following a respectable route while dismissing me for building one. Then, he said the only thing I really needed to hear, "We never looked, and that is on us." I did not forgive everything in that moment. But I agreed to 1 hour a month in a public place. Coffee, conversation, no pretending, no managing, just the slow work of meeting each other honestly. That was the beginning. Camila eventually sent me a handwritten letter, long, messy, more honest than any text she had ever sent. She admitted she had been so desperate to impress the Whitmores that she convinced herself excluding me was practical instead of cruel. She said she had destroyed something she should have protected. I believed she was sorry. I also knew sorry was not the same as repaired. So I wrote back and told her the truth too. I needed time. Maybe one day we could build something real. But guilt was not a foundation, and neither was blood alone. Her marriage did not last the year. Mine was never the wedding she should have worried about anyway. What mattered was this. While my sister was building a life around optics, I was building one around substance. While my family was measuring worth in titles they understood, I was creating something they could not imagine because they had already decided who I was. That was their mistake. The trophy from that night sits in my office now. Not because it proves anything to the people who underestimated me. It does not belong to them. It belongs to me. It reminds me that I built my life without their permission, without their approval, without waiting for anyone to finally see me correctly. And in the end, that mattered more than the headlines, the valuation, the house, or the applause. Because the real victory was never making them regret underestimating me. It was learning that my worth had never depended on them in the first place.